This is Michael Strong. I'm the founder of Expanse, and here we are at When School's Not Working, our weekly show about different pathways rather than the traditional pathway. We have Francisco Contreras Moran. I'm happy to say a guide, a lead humanities guide at Expanse, soon to be renamed the Socratic Experience. And before I get to introduce Francisco in more depth, we'll go to our co-host, Matt Barnes.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, Matt Barnes. I am the co-founder of the Education Game, which is a platform that works with families to help parents primarily reimagine what their child's education experience could look like. And so that includes, crazy things like enjoying learning, engaging in things that they actually want to learn about. I mean, just wild things. So we help parents figure that out. And again, I'm Matt Barnes. Good to be here. Kath, you're up.
I'm Katherine Freys, founder of Workspace Education and 100 Roads, and we are reimagining how you can have a fantastic education outside the school system. So we definitely have a lot of options for you if school's not working, and I'm very excited to hear about Francisco's journey and all the great things that he has, or the reasons why he had so much, I would say, guts to reach for what he wanted in his life, to get out of the school system and to really grasp what he was wanting to do. So I want to hear all his wisdom. So thank you for coming and joining us today, Francisco.
Terrific. Before Francisco gets on, I want to try to embarrass him by saying that all parents and students rave about him. He teaches community, personal growth, Socratic humanities, mentors students on projects, mentors students one-on-one, teaches writing, and parents and students love him. And I'm so happy that he is working at Expanse and educating young people. But for this call, for this webinar, we want to hear about Francisco's unique journey from student to teacher immediately without college, and then from teacher to Socratic educator, and from Socratic educator to St. John student, and then beyond. So tell us, first, Francisco, just being a teacher after high school, I think that's cool with no college. So give us a little bit of detail on that before you get into your Socratic journey.
Sure, thank you guys for having me again. So the way I went from student to teacher in right out of high school is that I had graduated from a small school. It was a conglomerate of homeschool families in Mexico, mostly American families, and had a very mixed experience with school. I loved learning. I loved poetry, especially. I enjoyed theology, which they offered there. Was voracious reader, but I didn't enjoy any of my classes and didn't do well in any of my classes, to the extent that even a couple of classes, I began to tell the teachers to let me read whatever I wanted in the back of the class without disturbing anyone, and I'll just take their tests, and the grade I get is the grade I get, but I wanted to be reading my own things, not doing anything that happened in the class. So I graduated. I applied to one college very haphazardly. I just went through the motions and applied to a college, got denied, and said, before I continue applying to more or seeing what I want to do, I don't want to continue to be in environments that I hate and that I have to pretend to participate in while I do my own thing. And I still love learning, and I still want to make money, and I still want to achieve higher things. I just need to figure this out. This was a longer process, right? I was first very heartbroken that I didn't get into the college and stuff like that. But I think through thinking, I deduced that what I needed to do before I continued was to figure out what went wrong. And if I wanted to do that, I had to go back to the source and be a teacher, right? Be in education to see if I could figure out what happened. And I first got a job at yeah, so maybe I'll stop there, that my decision to go from back to become a teacher came out of my dissatisfaction of my high school experience, and saying that I wanted to make money, so I needed to go to school, but I didn't want to be in a place I didn't like, so I needed to figure that out first.
Right now.
Yeah, real quick. So that's really interesting because I've worked with a lot of teachers who went back to educate because they had a great teacher, or they loved school, and so they wanted to have that same experience. I'm so glad to hear someone who had a terrible experience and they come back to want to change it, right? To make it better. So kudos for you for actually coming back into the beast, so to speak.
To be completely fair, I didn't come back because I wanted to help people necessarily, although I ended up loving helping others and teaching. I wanted to, it was very selfish. I wanted to go back to school because I didn't want to do more school. So I wanted to figure out a way to find out what went wrong with my education so that I can know how to move forward.
Francisco, why did you not like it so much? What was the problem with the school environment for you?
I disliked tests. I disliked not having opportunities to well, it's funny because I love memorizing poetry, right? But I didn't love memorizing answers. I hated memorizing answers. And I almost had just a gut reaction against tests. So it was mostly tests and studying for a test that I didn't like.
Got it. And then before going forward, in retrospect, do you think that the teachers of the classes that did not please you were, as it were, especially bad teachers? Or do you think they were not bad, but it was school itself, or the schooling itself, kind of the act of school?
Yeah, I think the teachers were very well-meaning, but at the end of the day, it was they were kind of like rigid champions of a system they didn't really understand or like, or they just thought it was necessary. It happens that most of the teachers at that very small school were not even teachers, right? They were parents of some of the other students. It was a very small homeschool school, and they were doing this job apart. Most of them were in ministry, so as a very small side gig from their larger occupations. So they were just, okay, I know what school is. There are tests. I'll teach you for the test, and then I'll go back to my church or something like that. So they didn't even really care that much. They cared about us as individuals, but not about the content at all of what they were teaching or if we were learning it.
Well, Francisco, I think that's an interesting point because most people, even homeschoolers, right? The same dynamic happens in homeschool communities and homeschoolers all the time, where they take the same model of school and they just bring it home, and it's the same structure, the same test, the same rigidity, right? Sometimes even worse. Sounds like what you experienced. So I think that's a caution for all the families that are like, well, maybe I'll just homeschool. No, what we're talking about is not taking school and putting it home, because sounds like that was an experience you went through. It's a different model entirely, which I guess is where you are now with Expanse, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think looking back, because these a lot of these teachers were extremely intelligent and cared about us deeply, it would only have taken a little bit of courage to go to a type of learning where you don't know what the outcome is, or you don't even know how to consistently test for the outcome. The reason I say that is because every day, because this was a very Christian school, we had theology class, apologetics. We even learned some Greek and some Latin to study the scriptures at the time, etc. And in those classes, because they were not for a grade, because they didn't have to fall into the rigidity, and because it was content that they were passionate about, even though I am not necessarily Christian anymore, or what even wasn't back then, I loved those classes. I enjoyed them. I enjoyed reading with them, talking about whatever it is that they were teaching, memorizing the the scriptures and learning the Greek. So because they didn't have to go into this rigid system and just share about something they loved, that was the highlight of the whole experience. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, great. Now, thank you. And now I'm eager to hear what it was like going from a student to becoming a teacher at like 18 years old, something like that.
Mm-hmm. So I graduated, when I graduated, I just turned 17, and I couldn't go directly into a high school, or I didn't know how to, or wasn't sure I wanted to do that. So I went first into a language institute and taught English as a second language, because I already knew the language and was proficient in it, and I enjoyed grammar. So it was a good transition into that. And as I was doing that, I was motivated by two things. First, I would earn a little more money as a teacher of other things other than English, as a teacher of literature in English, or as a teacher at a private school. I would earn a little more money. And also, I had begun reading some books about education and ideas about pedagogical ideas. I discovered John Taylor Gatto, who I read very, very deeply and with much interest. And I said, well, I want to try out some of these things. So I transitioned from the Language Institute to an alternative high school in my city.
And did you teach yourself English?
Sort of. So our whole family moved to Canada when I was 7 years old, and none of us knew any English, not my parents, not my sister, not myself. And there was no ESL program either. So they just threw us to normal public school and said, figure it out. And I guess we eventually did.
Yeah, got it.
So now I'd love to hear your journey from being a teacher to your interest in Socratic education in particular. Was it like year one, year two? I don't know, you were taught for like 4 or 5 years. So give us your trajectory.
Well, so when I was at the Language Institute and started reading about education, especially John Taylor Gatto, I realized that if I wanted to understand what went wrong, and I was beginning to put some of the puzzle pieces together in my own educational experience, I needed to try out reading more important things and reading, just expanding what I could teach other than, just conversation and grammar in English. So I went to this school that I knew had a vacancy for a high school teacher, and they were known for being very different from the other schools and not following the national educational program. And they didn't have a set high school curriculum yet. So they had just kind of opened up a high school. The director was very experimental and was, known for taking risks. So I said, okay, that's perfect. I can just talk my way into that vacancy. And I scheduled a meeting with her that she reluctantly took. And it was a long conversation because I was too young for her. I didn't have any university degree. I didn't have any experience teaching high school. I had some experience teaching ESL. And it was basically through the same things we were reading. And I kind of suggested that she take me on as a mentee, that I was sort of a very eager blank slate in learning how to teach. And that I would also, I said, I'm happy to be paid part-time and work full-time, and it'll be even cheaper for you. So after that, she said yes. And in the course of doing that, of reading with her and reading by myself these different books, I just began to record what I was learning and what I was trying out in my classroom on a blog, and began cold emailing every single living being that I read that was still alive, of the books I read and of the people that interested me. that's actually how I found you, Michael, how I found the person that suggested I go to St. John. So it was just continue reading, trying out things in the classroom, learning from her, learning online, and just for no particular reason or no clear goal in mind, just emailing as many people and trying to start up conversations with as many people as responded.
All right, Francisco, you're my kind of weirdo. let me explain what I mean by that. So you negotiated a job and you were able to figure out, how to adjust what you needed in order to get the job. And then you used that, well, I'm not sure you used the job, but you continued to learn, right? You are a learner, and learners are weird nowadays. So you were contacting people because you read a book and you reached out to call them. I'm trying to get a sense of how did you develop that sense of confidence? Because it's one of those things that I see over and over again, that kids just give up, they quit, they don't realize the doors that are open, they just have to walk through them or send an email. What possessed you?
I think so. Ever since I could remember, and the most vivid memory was since Canada, my parents, especially my mother, had a almost irrational blind faith in myself, in me. Even though the things I wanted, especially since middle school, she didn't exactly know how to get for me or understand. I went through high school and she was still learning English, and my whole high school was in English, so she never understood parent reports, or when the teachers asked to talk to her, I had to translate. But she, regardless of what happened to me, she always had a belief that I would figure it out. I remember when I was crying that I didn't get accepted to college, I didn't know what to do. My high school diploma wasn't valid in Mexico because of this weird school, and we didn't have any money to go anywhere else, etc. She asked me, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, I need to leave. I need to go somewhere else and study." And she said, "Well, okay, if that's what you want, you'll get it." And that's it. She never said anything more, but I always knew that was the case. And I had also a very close mentor at the Language Institute where I first worked, and he said something that I've used ever since, or he was continually teaching me something, because he was the kind of person who seems that he could do whatever he wanted, and the rules didn't quite apply for him. Everyone else had to follow some procedures and do some things, and he did the opposite sometimes, and everybody loved him for it. It wasn't as if he was an outcast. It's like, oh, that's cool, I want to do that. And I befriended him, and he said that professor types or teacher types always want a mentee and will break rules for a mentee. And are happy to allow breaking rules. And leader types, they want a patron because it makes them feel like a monarch, right? Everybody likes to be a patron of someone who wants to learn. So if you find a rigid system and you know who is in control and make them feel like a mentor or a patron, then you usually can get the freedom that you want and figure out things for yourself.
That's interesting. That's great. That's great wisdom.
I've followed it ever since. I think it hasn't failed yet.
I think it might be helpful to talk about the substance of what Socratic is and what Socratic is for you, because of course, while you and I have a rich sense of meaning, some people, I don't know if you remember the paper chase where the law professor is sort of aggressively asking questions. It's an old 70s movie. People may have lots of mental models in their mind. And so can you talk a little bit about whatever this Socratic thing is, what it is, and why it was valuable to you?
Yeah, so I think so when I started researching about Socratic, I found that there were two big ways of looking at it that turned out to be misconceptions, or that turned out to be not as true for me. And the first one was that Socratic was mostly the method, right? The moment you ask a question in a classroom or in a group, you're doing Socratic, and congratulations, regardless of what your question is aiming at or how you ask it or the intent of so that kind of one superficial way of looking at it. The second one, it's about the content. So if you discuss it together and you discuss kind of like great books or philosophy or something like that, you're doing Socratic. But I found that the people who understood Socratic deeply realized that you do need to think about the questions that you're asking, because what Socratic, the beginning of a good Socratic conversation is kind of giving yourself a restart in whatever it is you're thinking about. And that's exactly what it did to me, right? I had all these ideas about education and what it means to learn, and a lot of prejudices about what I didn't like and what I liked, and thinking about these Socratically with other people and trying them out and discussing education with my students was approaching it every time anew, because the Socratic itself gives you like a restart, a reset in approaching something, and then you can fill it with wonderful content and see how it works together dialectically and what resonates most with you. But it's hard to be open to new ways of looking at something you care about without a reset or a restart.
Interesting. Where'd you learn that?
I think through trying it in the classroom. I read Michael's book. I read a lot about a lot of John Taylor Gatto. He doesn't say the word Socratic, but he talks a lot about the trivium and about classical education and about the role of that being finding out the first principles of whatever it is that you want to understand, and really looking at those first principles stripped of everything else, and then going up from there. And that's another way, I guess, to talk about the reset that I found.
Interesting.
Why do you think a first principles approach appealed to you? Because not everybody, especially, I was going to say not young people, but really very few people are attracted to first principles. Is it just genetic randomness, or is there a causal reason?
It's a good question. I don't know. I want to say that it's almost like a remnant of funnily enough, the theological training that I got in junior high and high school, that especially in a lot of these apologetic traditions, whether it be Christianity or Islam or stuff like that, you do kind of you make arguments for whatever it is, the existence of God or whatever, through first principles. So I guess I was primed for that already.
Now, without going too far down the rabbit hole, we have Matt and Kath keep us from it. Sometimes I speculate as to whether or not the serious study of texts is in part a legacy of the religious study of texts. Of course, China has serious study of texts that, you know, depending on whether one considers Confucianism religious or not. But you know, I guess I'm worrying if we lose I guess this is a form of first principles. If we lose this religious appetite for digging deeply into texts, will young people at some point no longer care about digging into texts?
You know, I think everyone right now is being really challenged with trying to work out what truth, you know, in the social media and what they're reading, what is true and what isn't. And I think that because we, you know, there's just so much opinion, and that there's so many people who are not even sure what facts are now, that there is going to be a push to finding your truth and really understanding what you think about something. And that idea for resetting all the time through these discussions is really going to help the youth find their truth and, you know, discover their own epistemology of why they think about or why they believe what they believe. So I think there isn't a more important time for Socratic dialogue, but that wasn't really a question, Francisco.
And I'm Kath, and I'll pay you later. Well said.
If I could jump in on that though too, I mean, my kids went to a Christian classical school, left at middle school, but really enjoyed the Socratic dialogue. And again, I don't know if they used that language back then, but one thing that I think is important though is that the quality of the book matters, right? If the book is dealing with big issues as opposed to superficial issues, I think it's a more difficult book to talk about, but more important and more probably exciting. But I would look to you two to tell me if that's true or not. Can you get the same level of excitement and energy from what's the book about Captain Underpants, right? Does the quality of the book matter?
Well, I'll jump in and I'll let you, Francisco. So I would say certainly books that address first principle kinds of issues, and I think classic texts tend to address first principles. They're not always entertaining. So I'm sure for some audience, Captain Underpants is more entertaining. But I'll let you go, Francisco. How do you think of the role of text, and what characteristics of a text are needed?
I can't speak of Captain Underpants, but what I can speak of is a lot of, for example, students bring up manga that they're reading right now or shows that they're watching. And I think it's definitely possible to begin a conversation with these types of media that they care about and reach like very fundamental human questions. Mm-hmm. The difficulty, I guess, that brings sometimes is that you basically have to do a lot of work to see how that piece of media ultimately relates to something fundamental, whereas one of these classic texts, it is more clear that they are speaking about what is fundamental. So they basically give you a guide on how to reach those deep issues in the book itself, whereas you have to get there yourself or with others with one of these topical media.
And what do you mean, Francisco, by that which is fundamental?
Like if you watch a Marvel movie, for example, you are very much entertained. You can have a good conversation about, oh, why did this character do this? Or why is this villain a villain and stuff like that. But to get into kind of the deepest motivations, for example, of the characters or the vision that they have for the world and a good life or a bad life, there is some work that needs to be done, right? Some philosophic work that needs to be done together. And whereas in a classic book, the author himself wants to, or herself wants to get you to those questions. Mm-hmm. So there's a clearer path.
Yeah, and I feel like by traveling and doing things with other people, that is how I learned that you can be in the same situation with a bunch of humans and everyone have a completely different opinion of what's going on. And I think by having a universal truth that everyone can relate to, and then realizing that everybody in the circle might have a completely different take on the situation, we start really understanding how important it is to be empathetic and to really listen to people to actually find out where everybody stands on these positions. And, you can go through a whole day without a Socratic, situation or without a dialogue, and you're in your head all the time, getting your same version of what reality is, when in reality, there's a lot of different interpretations about the same thing that are going on all around us.
So Francisco, if I could, give me the so what about all this. I mean, who cares if kids are learning Socratically and dealing with these big issues? What's the point?
Well, to stay with motivations, for instance, talking deeply about what motivates you as a person, and if your motivations follow a specific goal that you have in your life, or there's no goal, you just go willy-nilly from this to that without any motivation. I think talking deeply about this, Socratically about this, can allow you to maybe break patterns of behavior that you didn't realize that you had, and have some clarity about doing something different than the patterns that you have been repeating without thinking. So if in your life you find yourself that, oh, I've been frustrating over and over again, and it turns out that when I think about it deeply, the frustration or repeating the same mistake stems from one source, in that I want to do that, but I end up doing that, then it's a way to begin to break that pattern and really get to what you want, for example.
I love that, the self-awareness. Sorry.
Yeah, I can see that being huge for middle schoolers and high schoolers that are just barraged with constant messages of the way that they could be, and most kids never ever get a chance to even question those messages.
Also, just such an enjoyable way to learn and to interact with people. That's almost relaxing. It's self-reflective. You know, it's not like when you're trying to write an essay and trying to think of the next sentence, which really hurts a lot of middle schoolers, right? They really enjoy sharing about themselves. Yeah, I just think it's a beautiful way to learn about each other and being in group and getting that information back.
Totally agreed. And of course, we could keep going on this. I like to use the expression, the conscious development of personal identity, but I also want to hear the rest of Francisco's story. So Francisco, not everybody leaves a teaching career and goes to an undergraduate college in their mid-20s or something. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I got hired at this alternative school and was reading and writing in my blog about the different things that I was experimenting with in the classroom, and that I wanted to try out but couldn't, or that I tried out and they worked and stuff like that. And slowly, like, my reading began to hone in on people that cared deeply about the liberal arts. I kind of discovered that most of even the newest methods of education claimed some kind of lineage to sitting down together and thinking logically about things and knowing the importance of words and doing an exegesis and stuff like that, discussion. And I said, okay, so if even these newer methods that I like claim lineage to that, let's go to the source and see what that is about. Why education changed so much. I was reading, like I said, a lot of Gatto, and he says the development from classical kind of education, or education that was very much involved in discussion, Socratic discussion, to this kind of test-based passive education that has no active literacies. So in that, and emailing many people, I started to have like a small group of readers, as sort of readership. And some of this readership included people who were currently engaged in kind of liberal arts education. There was someone, Adam Rose, who is a longtime teacher at the basic program of liberal education at University of Chicago, who we began talking a lot and reading together. And there was a local professor here who was also teaching the liberal arts in a college here. And I said, well, that's it. That's how I can start. And this is what I gravitate to. If I loved reading, I loved discussing, I want to do more of that. And just saying that over and over, eventually someone, I forget who, suggested St. John's College, where the only thing they do is that. So I said, okay, there you go. I don't know how, but I'm gonna get there.
And you figured it out. How did you get there?
Well, I got these two professors to write me a recommendation letter, and they had 3 recommendation letters at St. John's, and the third one, instead of picking someone else, I decided that I was gonna kind of get a lot of my students to write me a recommendation letter, like a short 2-sentence blurb, and put that And I think St. John's liked that because they commented on it, they thought it was cheeky. And I thankfully got a big scholarship and was able to go.
I tell you, I'm sorry if I interrupted Michael or Kath, but your level of creativity and possibility is fantastic. I would, if we have time, I'd like to go back further and talk more about those years between age, I don't know, 3 or maybe 5 years old to 10 or maybe 15, and understand what was going on to give you that kind of power. It's personal power is what it is. And you say, I want to hit that target, and how do I do it? And you start thinking about creative ways to solve it, and you end up solving the problem. That is a skill that every kid needs going forward. And so I just want to, again, encourage you and give you kudos for that.
I would agree. Do you know where it came from, Francis?
I think I want to thank my mother again. Like, not only was this unerrant faith in myself that I had no idea where it came from. Like, one thing is to love your child and to help your child and stuff like that. And the other thing, and what I noticed, is that she was very sure that anything I said I wanted to do, I would eventually do, even though I wasn't sure I would do it. I was just expressing some desire or some need that I had and stuff like that. And she was just completely sure that I would get there. And that was a big help. And I think since I was a child, I created the situation where it was like a force of necessity to, I said, okay, there is no other option. Either I get here or I get somewhere that's equivalent, but there is no other option, right? So either if I don't get this exact thing that I want, then the only option for me is to find the equivalent thing. But to just accept that I won't get either that or the equivalent is not an option.
Is your entire family as determined as you are, or are you an oddball in this respect?
I think my sister and I are very, very determined in a similar way. It's just that there is a way that requirements or prerequisites or paths and stuff like that they don't necessarily need to apply to us if we don't want them to. That people like always, there's some other option than following the rule that's just as good.
Yeah, so that's not determination. I mean, you are determined, certainly, but what I'm hearing is something different. It's creativity. It's seeing possibilities in problems. This is really entrepreneurial thinking, right? The combination of creativity and problem solving, yes, plus determination. But I'm fascinated. I want to hang out with your mom some. I could use some of this.
Well, and what comes up for me is, Francisco, you've mentioned Gatto as an influence vis-a-vis, the quadrivium and so forth. But when I think of Gatto, I think of his emphasis on how schooling makes us emotionally and intellectually dependent on others. And whether it's your mom or your homeschooling, what I'm getting is you were not raised to be intellectually or emotionally dependent on school.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's kind of like a common idea that I resonate with, that that books pick you in a sense, right? That you should read widely, but there are some books that can articulate something that maybe your parents instilled in you, or that are your deepest convictions, and you find the book or the person that says it with the most clarity, that you say, yes, that's what I've been thinking about, or that's what I've believed my whole life. I have never found the words to say it. But especially Gatto, when he describes the autonomy and independence that he gave his students and how they wielded that autonomy and independence, right? That it was almost on the border of chaos, of recklessness, right? That the students believed that they could talk to the mayor of New York City, and for no particular reason than their belief that they could do it, and the fact that they had to figure out a way to do it, right? So I think I definitely picked up on that, this autonomy and independence, and he, for example, articulated the most at that time, the most deeply.
Got it. And then, would you say that you gradually became, I'm interested, of course, your experience now as a Socratic educator. Would you say that you were pretty Socratic before you entered St. John's, that as an educator, you were already doing basically great books Socratic the last year or two of your teaching career prior to St. John's?
I think so. So I taught at this school for 4 years. And for the first 3 years, the classes that they gave me was a literature class and this other class called Project Development and Management. And just tried different things, got the students to create projects, and that was fine. But the class that they gave me during my last year of teaching there was called Analytical and Critical Reading. And the class was kind of a failure at that time. So they only gave me the title, right? They didn't give me anything else. They said, okay, we created this class called Analytical and Critical Reading, but we don't really know what to do with it. And we have kind of a textbook, but we don't like it. So here you go, you teach that class and figure out what it means. And I said, oh, okay. And I think in figuring out what that class would be, I eventually came that the best thing it could mean is talking about the best things we could find and that we all liked, the best books that we could find and we all liked, and seeing how they immediately apply to our lives, and if they do, right? So I think it's almost a little different than some others. I don't know if you'd agree, Michael, but it's a little different that it wasn't all academic, or I didn't really care about the history of philosophy or math. It was just, let's find the best thing that we know of to read and then see if this has an immediate relevance in our lives now, and we'll go from there.
And did the students respond? Did they like it, dislike it? What was your experience like?
Yeah, I think I was very lucky that at that time I had been with more or less the same group in that class for 3 years. So they were already comfortable in going completely different directions, and me saying, okay, I want to try out this, and it might not work, and many times they did not work, so we had to try out something else and stuff like that. So they were comfortable following me along in any crazy ride, but I think they also very much gravitated to this. We didn't call it Socratic at the time. We called it collaborative close reading, but I think we all found a way to talk to each other that was our favorite way of talk to each other, and that is with the help of the best book that we could find.
And then I would love to hear, now that you did a little bit of Socratic with me in ATI at San Francisco, and now you're full-time. Would you say your experience of teaching kids now is similar to that, different from that, or in what ways similar and in what ways different?
It's been constantly evolving since then, very, very much so. I would say that that St. John's, for example, was a very valuable experience in going really deep with the text and understanding a book in itself and etc. But I think since Expanse, it's kind of reawakened the fact that these books should drive action, and immediate action, should drive action tomorrow, right? And this process of the moment you feel that you have an insight, you should try it out in the world tomorrow and see how it responds and just keep adapting from there. So I think it's a more complete view, right? That includes the community and the project, your personal project, and that, yes, these books articulate things that you had wanted to articulate for a while, but once there's understanding that can only get solidified if you apply it to your life tomorrow.
That's fantastic. That's the opposite. That's the opposite of everything I've come to understand about traditional school.
And of course, go ahead, Kath.
No, well, I'd like to have a little bit more practical advice for parents out there who, maybe they want to start doing more Socratic practice in their homeschooling, or just with their child in general, or in the car, or maybe they could read a book together. How do you suggest that parents get started in Socratic, and look, are there books that they should be reading, or how do you just get started as a parent?
Well, there's Michael's book, there's Gatto, but as a immediate practical advice, I would say that it's very hard having a Socratic conversation without a goal in mind. But I think you do have to be open enough to not have a goal in mind, right? Like there's no learning objective, no, as traditionally understood in a Socratic conversation, that you want, yes, your child to be a better person and understand things and stuff like that, but you have to be comfortable not knowing how that's going to be accomplished, and being open to finding that out together in the conversation.
Awesome. And what about like books? Are there where would they start to find, what kind of books would you recommend at the beginning?
I would say that they should find the book that they think is the best book that they know, regardless of what it is and regardless how seemingly difficult it is, and just begin reading that with their kids, even if it's a sentence at a time, if it's a really difficult book, or if it's more, just find what you like the most or what you think is most important and just read that.
Thank you.
I want to go back to the immediate action. The purpose of it is immediate action. Where exactly did you acquire that perspective?
I think it was Gatto, like even just the emotional resonance of hearing all his stories about what his students were doing, and the fact that most of his stories were stories that happened outside the classroom. So what he was doing inside the classroom was incredibly fascinating, and the way he talked to his students and stuff like that. But whenever he talked about his students, a lot of what he said was what they did outside the classroom. And I found, yes, that must go together, right? That if it doesn't drive action, then it's a great way to spend your time, right? It's a great way to spend your leisure reading about stuff and talking about it. But we don't necessarily just want to spend your time well. We want to act meaningfully on the world and have this kind of purpose and go towards it.
Cool. And then a lot of our guests had faced resistance from either friends or family or peers or anything. I would kind of expect your mom was supportive, but I shouldn't assume that. Did you face resistance along your path from anyone?
Well, as I was teaching, the hurdle of not being credentialed, especially in Mexico, it was always some resistance. And so it was always it was something that I always needed to have in mind. And also the resistance of most of the things that I wanted to try were things that the students were completely unfamiliar with, that my peers were completely unfamiliar with, that the director didn't exactly really understand, that I didn't understand yet. I just read it and wanted to try it out. So kind of confronting the fact that that novelty is not something that's comfortable to people. So that's the first resistance, and that it's hard to think outside of traditional credentialism or requisites. That's also a constant resistance.
So true. So true. Yeah, the paradigm of traditional school is just so powerful. I think it's just hard to overcome at times.
Did anybody ever kind of tell you, Francisco, look, you're uncredentialed, you don't know what you're doing, this is how you teach, get back to teaching, darn it? Did you get anything that sort of blunt?
Yes, there were a couple of peers, right, of other teachers at the school who that did have that sort of attitude, especially because I was much younger than any of them. Like the next youngest teacher was 20 years older than me. So there was definitely that. And the fact that when they asked me exactly to give a thorough theoretical account of what I was doing, I many times couldn't do that. I could tell you why I was doing what I was doing, but I couldn't kind of cite the what they could cite or etc. So I did get that, but I never really cared. I only cared when it meant that I couldn't teach my next class. Otherwise, I would say it's fine. We'll see at the end of the semester how the students turn out.
Was your job actually threatened if you didn't comply at any point?
I think the only threat I faced was that if there was, for example, a audit at any of the schools that I was teaching, that I could get them in trouble for for example, having a university degree with like either the government or with other parents and stuff like that. So I always had that in mind and kind of tried to ease the director's fears as much as I could constantly, and kind of having a very strong relationship with parents so that if it came out that I didn't have a university degree, there would already be a relationship there so I can speak to them about what happened during that time.
Well, but because you didn't have that, you weren't indoctrinated, you now were able to think more clearly and maybe create things that a seasoned educator may not even consider. And that, to me, again, is part of the entrepreneurship that you were showing. You're experimenting, you're problem solving on the fly, and you're iterating constantly, and you're expecting your learners to do the same. That, to me, is just beautiful.
I think so too. I think I was also unfortunately lucky in that I could have so much freedom because, and I'm thinking about the external view of what I was doing, right? To the parents or to the other schools or to the government. I could be very experimental because the other teachers made sure that the students looked good and they were doing their national tests and were achieving them. So I think it was still that eased their fears. And in general, it might be relevant to this group that it's a hard problem, right? When you don't have that fallback. Yeah, I don't know what the solution is, whether to have a chunk of your schooling be completely free and experimental tinkering and iterating, and still have another part where you save face and do these tests, or to completely disregard it, or combination and negotiation, something like that.
Well, I've got opinions on that, so let's move on.
Yeah, I've got lots of opinions on that, but we're getting towards the time for the Kath question and the Matt question. So I'm always juggling things, so maybe we'll go with the Kath question first tonight.
Okay, so my question is always like, outside the school system, I know that the school environment didn't work for you very well. What would you have liked to have had outside that you could have maybe gone to or found other kids, or what sort of things would you have liked to have had in place of school if school didn't exist?
I think if somehow for all of my school, I could replicate what happened in, for example, these theology classes, that I would have had a great educational experience. In other words, if there were adults that just adults or people older than me who said, I love this, and I want to share this with you, not so that you will get here or get there, but just because I love it so much that I want to share it with you. And there were enough adults to do that, and instead of school I did that, then it would have been a great time.
I would say that not only, I think for me personally, I think that's a great answer, but also original. We've never had anybody go in that direction. I think most people are kind of looking at more sort of structural kinds of things. The notion that young people need to have adults talk about what they love, I think is wonderful and resonates for me big time. Thank you. Go ahead, Matt. You want to give him the mic?
Yeah, sure. So, the question that I'm always trying to understand from folks like yourself, Francisco, is if you had the magic wand and you could make one change in how education or how schools work, what would be that one thing that you would aim for?
And we're talking, for example, what most traditional schools.
Yes, traditional schools. Yes, sorry about that.
One change. I'd be curious to see what happens if you eliminate the concept of a learning objective. What will result there? If you had to still, as an educator, be a champion of learning and care about your students, but you had no learning objective to fall back on, I think that'd be a good first start.
I love that. I think that would be great. Yeah. Well, make it happen, Francisco. You have the creative skills and the tenacity and the entrepreneurship where I think if you were just to decide you're going to fix education worldwide, you would figure it out. So please get started. What are you talking to us for? Get off the phone and get to work.
I would add, by the way, that the notion of eliminating learning objectives is regarded by the establishment as almost like,
it's heresy.
Yeah, it's total heresy. Clear learning objectives is, school 101. Again, it's a very original hack. Get rid of learning objectives. Be fun to see where it goes.
Definitely.
Anything else?
I just want, Francis, I'd like you to share with your mom so that I'm so glad to meet you, and I'm glad that whatever she did to shape the young man, and it sounds like your sister as well, that you all have become, that's going to pay dividends for generations. So please pass along my thanks and gratitude.
Be happy to tell her that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco, for joining us. It was wonderful having you. And we are, when school's not working, join us next Monday for an exciting guest who's very passionate about escaping the system. So thanks, Francisco, Kath, Matt, and we will see you next week.
Take care.
Bye, thank you. Bye.